Welcome to a special edition of Hoopsville. I'm Dave McHugh. It might be the middle of basketball season, but on this special episode, we're going to talk a bit more about Division III as a whole. The NCAA convention is this week, and is the most significant conventions in the modern history of the NCAA. All three divisions have to approve or ratify a new constitution, a very new constitution. That constitution has been worked on for the last few months, or longer, depending on how you look at things. All three divisions will be involved, including a special convention that was held back in November, virtually. Welcome to a special edition of Hoopsville. I'm Dave McHugh. It might be the middle of basketball season, but on this special episode, we're going to talk a bit more about Division III as a whole. The NCAA convention is this week, and is one of the most significant conventions in the modern history of the NCAA. All three divisions have to approve or ratify a new constitution. A very new constitution. That new constitution has been worked on for the last few months or longer, depending on how you look at all this, with all three divisions being involved, including a special convention held back in November virtually. But the Constitution is not the only important piece of legislation and business Division III has to undertake at the convention. Each year, the divisions come together to debate and vote on their own legislation as well. This year, Division III has a number of interesting and important items to consider that will affect a lot of sports, including basketball. Later in the episode, we'll be joined by D3Sports.com's Pat Coleman to discuss the Constitution and legislative items. But to better understand what will be talked about and voted on from the Constitution to that legislation, we put together a roundtable of Division III athletic directors along with a commissioner. They include Dr. Angel Mason, who is Director of Athletics at Berry College, also chair of the Division III Financial and Technical Committees. Jason Fine, Director of Athletics at Bates College. He is also the chair of the Division III Management Council and an ex officio member of the Board of Governors and Division III President's Council. All roles he will step down from at the end of this convention. Plus, he's a former member of the Championships Committee. Also, Brad Bankston, Commissioner of the Old Dominion Athletic Conference. He is a former Management and Championships Committee member, also a former Football National Committee chair. He was one of the Division III's representatives on the NCAA Constitutional Committee. And Stephanie, or Stevie, Baker-Watson, who's the Associate Vice President for Campus Wellness and the Director of Athletics at DePaul University. She's also a former chair of the Division III Management Council and Championships Committee. She also was a representative for Division III at the NCAA Constitutional Committee as well. We gathered this roundtable at the end of last week via the Blue Frame Technology Hoopsville Hotline. Well, thanks everybody for coming in. I really appreciate it. We don't do panels all that often, though Zoom certainly allows it, and I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules, especially ahead of the convention, to talk a lot about all of this. Not only the constitutional side of it, which encompasses not only Division III, but the entire NCAA, but some interesting topics on the table that will affect or may not affect everybody at the Division III level. I want to start with the constitutional, because obviously the Constitution is where everybody's talking, or at least has their focus maybe, versus some of the other specific Division III things. We have two members who were on the committee who kind of oversaw things to some degree. Granted, all of you had a role in some case. Stevie Baker-Watson and Brad Bankston specifically. I think the Constitution's complicated for a lot of people. I know I've tried to read into it a lot, and sometimes I get lost, and sometimes I shouldn't get lost because it's pretty simple. Can you guys just kind of give us an understanding of the changes of the Constitution, should they be passed and put in place, what that does overall, and maybe for the division? Stevie, happy to start with you.
Well, Dave, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said you're a little bit confused about it. I don't know how many members had actually looked at our Constitution before this process started. And that seemed to open up a Pandora's box, because we were looking at things going, we don't do this type of thing. And then in other places we were like, oh yeah, that is who we are, kind of thing. So, this process, we say in a very simple way, took this really big document that was like 45 pages that people didn't read, and it's brought it down closer to maybe 18 pages right now. It's supposed to be more concise. I can point out some of the differences that we're going to see should this new Constitution be adopted, but I also want to be clear that this Constitution it's either positive or negative in the eye of the beholder. It's hard to sometimes say what is really going to benefit our division, because I think we all have different values from individual members. And I think that Brad would agree with me. We really respect that as members of the committee and others who are in this Division III space. So let me start off and share a couple of things, then I'm going to throw it on over to Brad to sort of fill in the blanks at the end. So first thing that we see is that the 3.18% in the Constitution isn't changing in terms of our revenue distribution, but we do feel that we're going to get increased dollars back into our budget, probably about $1.5 million, which represents the overhead that our division was paying back to the National Association for general services that had been provided to us. So things like insurance, some other administrative costs, sort of things. And I would say in this process, what we've done is said, we're going to reset what those services are going to be in terms of 2022, no longer 1996. And that we're actually going to put on paper what that is, because that's a great space where we spent a lot of time I'm going to say debating, but maybe it was just informing our membership of what it really meant to have those services out there for them in that space. The other thing that this new Constitution, should it be adapted, will do for us is it'll give greater autonomy to our division. And by that, it means that our President's Council will be able to sponsor changes. Right now, any change to the Constitution has to come from the Board of Governors. So we'll be able to put some things out there and in front of folks for consideration. Brad, what are some of the other key things that you pulled out as we were looking at this?
Stevie, I think you've hit on the two key topics, certainly on a financial perspective and some autonomy pieces. I think some of the things that won't not only benefit Division III, Dave, but also the association as a whole is student athlete representation. One of the changes and one of the key topics, at least for the division or Division III's perspective, was the Board of Governors composition. And we went through this conversation a number of years ago when the independent members were put on the Board of Governors. We had a debate, we had a vote very similar to what we're going to do related to the Constitution in Indianapolis this time around. But one of the things we've done is we listened to the student athletes. There were 3 student athletes on the Constitution Committee. They were vitally, they were fully immersed in the process, so much so that even as Chairman Gates was working through the document, there were portions of that document that were actually written by the student athletes. So our committee had the opportunity to vet those ideas, discuss those, what are those implications actually in the real world, for the practitioners that are actually working on campuses, to how that would work. And we left with a representative on the Board of Governors, a student athlete representative on the Board of Governors, someone who has graduated that either from Division I, II, or III. And for those, whoever's representing one division, the other 2 representatives will be in the room ex officio. So we felt like that's a great emphasis and listening ear for the student athletes' concerns. And the composition of the Board of Governors changed dramatically too. It went from 21 to 9. And as a result of that, there's no divisional majority within that group. Division I now has 4 representatives, whereby in the previous Board of Governors, they had 21. So win or loss, kind of as Stevie said, depending upon which lens you're looking at. In our mind, we felt like that gave Division III's voice a greater opportunity, as well with the student athletes, and still having 2 independent members of that Board of Governors. We saw a pretty clear advantage from our end in the governance of the association as a whole. But Stevie, those are the 2 things that I see. I think if you talk about whether it passes or it doesn't pass, Dave, I think that's the ultimate question. And I think our fine friend and Jason Fine will be able to give us a little bit more information about what's next, because that's the exciting part about Division III for Division III in my mind is, we have this chance to kind of reset. And when we get a chance to reset, that's a chance to open up, everything that we're doing legislatively and other pieces of our bylaws as we start to take these pieces of the Constitution and find a place for them. And Jason's on that group in the advisory group, and maybe he can lend a little bit more credence from a management council perspective about where we go from here.
Yeah, but before we jump into that, and because I think ultimately it could hinge or maybe be a part of it, I do want to circle back on the 3.18% and the BOGs to some degree. Brad, as you pointed out in the BOG, we kind of circled back on this a couple of years ago to expand it, get more representation, et cetera. And I remember making a comment at the time, this was an opportunity for Division III to maybe flex its muscle and say, hey, we're fine with growing here. We're fine with adding more members that we're probably going to be for Division I, but we would like a little bit more of the percentage of the pot, as it were. Instead of 3.18%, let's 4. I'm making up numbers, but it seems like this year we also had that opportunity. I say we as a division to do that again and say, fine, we're willing to let you make these decisions, make these changes to the Constitution, but we need a little bit more because, and I'll make the quick argument, what embodies the NCAA is what Division III is. You all use us as an example. You all use us as this is a student athlete. We want to be better like Division III, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then give us a little bit bigger piece of the pie so our championships can be a little bit more like yours. Was that ever on the table? Was that ever an option? Because you say it's at 3.18%, but was it ever an option to maybe make that a larger number?
So, I think Stevie knows that what all the conversations we had in that room, Dave, we can't share. So we're not going to be able to answer that question.
Sure. I realize. I'm not joking. Looking for those details.
I'm joking. That was my opportunity to punt. No, yes, it was on the table. Yes, there was extensive conversation around finance. Stevie and I spent a great deal of time working with our colleagues from Division III, looking at alternatives to try to help our division with the percentages. You have to understand the dynamics in the room, certainly. And most importantly, the real rub wasn't the 7.55, wasn't the totality percentage, right? It was the 7.55 that is governed between Divisions 2 and 3. So Division 2 receives 4.37, Division 3, 3.18. So the real kind of conversation was a better balance of the 7.55. And I'll just leave this out there to say, I'm not sure who in Division 2 wanted to stand up and raise their hand and say, we're willing to give a portion of our 4.37 to Division 3. So it wasn't on the table. Yes. Did we have extensive conversations about it? Yes. And did we have an opportunity in the room to have an open dialogue about finance? We did. And in the end, we felt like the progress we made on the the overhead and the opportunities that we had with that coming back to our budget, which is essentially a 5% increase. Given the opportunities that we had, that's certainly what we took, and I think it's an advantage for our division moving forward. Stevie, I don't know if you could add anything to that on the finance, and then we'll get our other two panelists involved in what we're doing here.
You nailed it. I mean, we talked about every single thing that in that document. There's not, I mean, let's be honest, there's not a sentence in there that we didn't have the opportunity to give feedback on. So we talked about it, but like Brad said, it was really much more about that conversation of that 7.55%. We were running numbers and we know where we kind of want to be. And we got halfway there, perhaps, for us to be able to do things. But this is also a moment in time for our division. Now that should this pass, and should we know now what our bottom line budget is going to be, we need to have some philosophical discussions about how much money we're going to spend in different places, and perhaps start saying no to some things so that way we can fund other things that are more important to us.
Yeah, interesting perspective. And granted, I know that conversation about how to spend has come up numerous times. I remember other conventions where, hey, it's a 75-25 split of championships versus overhead, for lack of a better description, offices and everything else, conferences. And is that the way we want to spend it? Majority says yes, but you're right. Now that we know the reality, maybe that number gets reevaluated. Jason, yeah, I do want to turn to you, and then Angel, get your opinion as well. All right, so we're now at an impasse. Not an impasse. We're at the crossroads. It's either passing or it's not going to pass. Division III has the biggest block of voters. There is an argument to be made that Division III can blow this whole process up. There's also a point where it just goes along and passes whatever everybody wants. What happens if this does pass? What's the next evolutionary step with this, and what do we see in Division III?
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and Steve and Brad, thank you for all that you have done, because I do know that all of those questions have been asked and answered so many times, and I think it's important to note that all of these things really were discussed a lot, and I think a point that Stevie just made is kind of important, is that we are getting basically about half of what we thought we needed anyway. To kind of, but I think more importantly, we get this opportunity to kind of chart our own course going forward as a division. And as you mentioned, Dave, Division III is, the largest division, but also the division that arguably brings the best stories and the best in, collegiate athletics and what student athletes achieve. We are tied to our institutions in Division II and Division I, and especially the ones that get a lot of media coverage for doing things that probably we wouldn't be so proud of. So I think it gives us this opportunity right now to go back. We do have the Constitution Advisory Committee. There'll be some type of surveying and steering group that will, chart this next set of months, right? So that we can figure out what is the best way for us to use the budget that we have. What's the best way not only to split up that 75-25 that you talked about, but within those buckets, to Stevie's point, what are some things that maybe we're not going to do anymore, that we're going to reevaluate and say, why do we do these things? And some of those things are tied to the full association. They don't really need to be anymore. So I think that there are definitely some advantages going forward. Exactly how we chart that course, we got to go through step one first, which is the vote, and get past that. But of course, we're having those conversations. If it passes, it goes this way. Obviously, if it doesn't, that's the end of those kind of discussions. So you don't want to get too far down the road, but there won't really be any change, nor any kind of reconsideration. It's not like we're going back to the table to say, okay, well now how about you give us this? That there's no window for that. So I think that's important to note as well.
So the key being there, obviously, if it passes, it starts off a whole nother set of conversations to narrow everything down. What should be important with this Constitution too, and that I think was interesting, is gives a little bit more autonomy to Division III or all the divisions. I don't remember what item it was, but there obviously is an all division vote on sports and whether it should be championships or not. And that's how we got to 90. But there was something that I remember coming up in conversation that needed to be, it was the raising the dues. You needed Division I and Division II to kind of come on board to say, yes, you can raise your dues. We won't take the pot. We'll let you keep those raised dues. You needed everybody to come on board with that. Now, if I understand it correctly, if this passes, Division III gets to make its own decisions on its dues and what it does, or anything else that relates to only Division III. That's significant.
Yeah, and it's not only the active membership dues. Keep in mind that's also reclassifying members, provisional members, new members. I'd be surprised if Division III was not a desirable spot for some folks that some institutions that are not in Division III at the moment, where they want to then end up. We'll have to decide what type of parameters we put around that. And we are a very large division right now, 460 some odd members, and memberships of all different types of institutions. So I think that the important thing is, that first step is going to be to kind of reaffirm what we are as a division, and then figure out, what we do with, others that want to become and be a part of this.
And we've already started seeing those sides of even D1 saying, okay, enough of this. And quickly, and if it doesn't pass, we just go back to what we've been doing status quo, rightly or wrongly. As you said, we're not doing the whole process over again unless somehow D1 or others want to do it. This is it. This is the end of the road, as it were.
Yeah, and I'd be surprised if those conversations haven't been happening at the D1 and the Power 5 level as well, right? So I think we have to be cognizant of that, and then we would again lose the additional 1.5 million, that we stand to gain. We're still going to be able to take advantage of all of those services and those, that overhead. So whether it be catastrophic insurance or services from the national office, like that's all very important, and it's significant money.
Yeah, it is. Angel, we haven't had a chance to hear from you. I would love to get your perspective on a lot of this, considering, 460 schools. We only have 4 of you on here technically representing all the schools, but I do want to kind of get your perspective on some of this, is kind of not outside the room necessarily, but obviously not involved with Brad and Stevie as much either.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that to Stevie's point is a very clear, and I would say, in my opinion, right one with her starting statements is, depending on where you're sitting, you see this as a positive or negative, right? And we are an extremely diverse group of institutions in Division III, right? So there are those who a sticking point in not having more financially based on the percentage alone, right? There's not a lot of energy being given to the overhead that we would receive if this does actually, pass and get amended, that it really comes down to fundamentally feeling that Division III should be respected more for what it does for the overall NCAA membership. And not giving any on that is where many in the division feel that there's a level of, for lack of better words, disrespect for the division. rather I personally feel that way or not is really not on the topic. It's our job to represent as much of our division as possible, and that's part of it, right? So if this does end up passing, yes, I think that there are a lot of benefits. I think we will have to be back at the drawing board and trying to prioritize our division. Trying to figure out ways that we want to continue to try and build revenue. Do we start to identify championships that we think could be revenue generating, sponsorships, things of the sort? All of those conversations would have to take place. I think the difference with that is we would be able to make those decisions as Division III and not needing approval from Division II or Division I. And then on the flip side of that, if it doesn't pass, then yeah, we are status quo. Which means everything that we want to change, we need the other divisions in order to do. And we would still have our overhead, which I think for us will lead to more conversations about how we do what we do with the monies that we do have to continue to support our championships and the emerging sports that are coming on to the table that will eventually get to championship status and how we continue to support those. Our division isn't getting smaller.
Well, and the growth of some of those sports. I mean, some of those sports are growing rapidly to maybe see a 64-team bracket. That's more money on the table because you got to spend on those tournaments. So it's not only the growth of the division, but it's the growth of sports too, not just emerging, but established as well.
Yeah, it's both of them. And the other part becomes it all trickles down, right? There's always conversations about our championships and how we do the regions and how you make it and who you end up having to compete against. And, oh, how in God's name did this person have to play there? Well, there are a lot of things to be considered when that's taken place. And if you're just on the little island of the individual team you're trying to support or that individual sport, yeah, you can't see the bigger picture, right? If you're standing right in the midst of the woods, it's very, very hard to see the shore.
Angel, I feel like that was a comment towards us, but it's okay. But in the grand scheme of things, I'm going to take your line and save it on my hot button because you're right. It's when it's what you see in your sport and not understand the grand landscape, why things can't be changed, why things are universal, et cetera. It's something that we've certainly preached. We certainly appreciate that from a larger picture. If you don't mind, I want to straw poll you guys. Obviously, I'm not holding you this, but I am curious. Do you all feel that this will pass A, through Division III, and B, overall at the NCAA level? Will we get a new constitution that will allow a little bit more autonomy for Division III? You can show hands or talk, whatever, but I am curious. What do you think? Angel, maybe we'll start with you on that.
I do think it'll pass. And I think that it will pass because there are enough individuals that see the 1.5 million overhead as a positive for the division. But I think that there's probably more people that like the idea of Division III having autonomy and no longer being held responsible to poor decisions of other divisions.
Jason, do you think this will pass?
I do, and I think that last piece that Angel said for me is a little bit of a tipping point with folks. The way that you look at everything, aside from having an opinion, perspective matters, and I think that perspective is starting to permeate the membership. That for the longest time, Division III has been defined really in the public eye by what we're not. Right? When you ask someone, "What's the Division III of the NCAA?" Oh, that's the ones without the scholarships. Oh, that's the ones with, and we've done I think it's, the last 10 years or so with an identity initiative to really push what Division III is. And I think that we're starting to see that opportunity is there even more now with this vote. So I think that coupled with the fact that, yes, we're the largest division, but we're not the only division. And I think that Division II and Division I are overwhelmingly going to vote for it. So yeah, I do think it will pass.
Brad, your perspective?
God, I hope so. And I say that because
you've been through the meetings.
we've been in the meetings, we've seen the process, and I say that, Dave, with this in mind. It's a better document. It's a better document than what we're currently working under. It's more concise. It allows Division III to kind of take the pieces that are in the previous document and apply them to our bylaws or make the changes that are necessary. And it, again, depending on the eye of the beholder, whether it is a better document or not. And I would tell you, it comes down to the almighty dollar. Everything we're talking about here comes down to how we spend our money as a division. And now we have a chance to kind of have that conversation. We have that chance to have that conversation now. But this has been the kick in the pants through all of this discussion over the course of the last 2 or 3 months that's putting us in this position to do it. So do I think it's going to pass? Yes. I do think there'll be some in Division III, maybe even some at the Division I level that will oppose it for a myriad of reasons, not just the ones that we've talked about. And some of it's just principle in the process. But that's certainly their opportunity to do that.
Stevie?
I think it passes. And I'm really interested to see the overlap between our Division III, Division IV vote back in, what would that have been, 2008?
Oh, you brought up Division IV. Yeah, uh-huh.
I'm really curious to see the overlap of the no's, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So whether or not those 100 institutions or so are about the same. And if they are, this is the moment to do something about it. We chatter a lot, and now is the time for some folks to consider action. I'm not kicking anybody out, but if you don't feel aligned even after 15 years, try to do something to feel more aligned.
Interesting. All right. I love, thank you. Appreciate that. That was our first part of the conversation with Angel Mason, Jason Fine, Stevie Baker Watson, and Brad Bankston, primarily on the topic of the NCAA Constitution and Division III role in crafting that Constitution. We'll talk with them more in a moment. Several things that came from that conversation that are interesting to the point that Division III is the example of the NCAA uses to showcase the term student athletes and what the NCAA is all about. I'm reminded of the 2015 convention in Washington, D.C. Mark Emmert, president of the NCAA, spoke as he does at the start of the convention and talked about how things were evolving in the NCAA, how Division I and II were taking pages from Division III by adding student athletes to different boards and giving them a vote. He also spoke about how the Division III was this shining light of what the NCAA means. Part of that opening event, Mr. Emmert also had the chairs of the president's councils for all three divisions on the dais and spoke with them about their divisions. Division I spoke about how they were evolving, giving some autonomy to the Power Five, adding student athletes to boards, and how things were going so well. Division II's president talked about how they had a budget surplus, so they were expanding championships and opportunities for student athletes, how it was so great to be in Division II with its financial stability. The comments from the Division III President's Council chair were the exact opposite. Sharon Herzberger, the now former president of Whittier, talked about how the division was dealing with a significant budget deficit, how belts were being tightened with how the championships for all sports were being conducted, and how other areas within the growing Division III world and their budget were getting cut or augmented. It was met with an audible groan and a somewhat of a "yeah, it sucks" response from those in attendance, which D3 likely made up half. So it's interesting to also hear that basically Division I wasn't willing to change the 3.18% of the overall budget allocated to Division III. But even more interesting, the financial conversation revolved around the 7.55% allocated to both Divisions II and III together. I read in several articles, and it was mentioned here, that there was talk about Division II giving up some of their financial budget to give to Division III. It is too bad we couldn't have found a way to round up that 7.55% to maybe 7.75% or even 8%. To put that in hard numbers, Division III's allocated budget at 3.18%. Currently for this academic year is $35.1 million. If we receive 3.38%, it would be $39.2 million, or more than $4 million more. If we receive 3.63% of the budget, it would equate to $40.1 million, or $5 million more. If this new Constitution passes, Division III won't have to pay the overhead costs of basically running the division, which equates to $1.5 million or more. So the division does get back about half of what a small percentage increase would have been. So that's at least nothing, but it could have been so much more. For a division the NCAA says as a whole and other divisions makes the NCAA so great. When we come back, we hear from our roundtable about the legislative items Division III will be considering this week. Of course, Pat Coleman will join us with reactions as well. You're watching a special edition of Hoopsville presented by D3Hoops.com from the NABC studios.
We've got more schools than Division I, more fans than Division II, and more upsets than March Madness. There's 800 programs with over 11,000 games leading to 2 national championships. And we've been covering it all for over a decade. From Eastern to Occidental, from Puget Sound to Piedmont, from Southwestern to the University of New England, and from Hope to Calvin. Nobody covers Division III basketball like we do. We're at D3Hoops.com at www.d3hoops.com.
For the love of the game. But for those of us who are Division III student athletes, it's more than that, a lot more.
Sure, the game is important, but as we work so hard to build both mind and body, it's more about team.
That is why NCAA Division III teamed up with Special Olympics, and in giving the gift of sport to those for whom it seemed an impossible dream, we are working to make this a better world.
Help us keep that dream alive.
You can make a difference.
Now back to this special edition of Hoopsville presented by D3Hoops.com. We are in our NABC studios. I want to take a chance to also thank our partners at the Women's Basketball Coaches Association and, of course, Blue Frame Technology, all of their help to allow us to put Hoopsville on the air. While we're already recorded this episode, I should probably also remind you of our social media options in case you want to interact with us or find out about future shows, including the upcoming Hoopsville Marathon. Follow us on Twitter at D3Hoopsville. You can use the hashtag Hoopsville. That's also how you can find us on Instagram at D3Hoopsville and the hashtag Hoopsville. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Hoopsville. And of course, we're also on YouTube, youtube.com/Hoopsville. We'll simulcast live shows on those 2 avenues as well. And don't forget, you can also email us, Hoopsville at D3Sports.com. That's Hoopsville at D3Sports.com. Now back to our roundtable. Our conversation continued talking specifically about the legislation Division III has on the agenda for the business session on Saturday. Angel Mason from Barry, Jason Fine from Bates, Stevie Baker-Watson from DePaul, and Brad Bankston from the ODAC joined me last week on the Blue Frame Technology Hoopsville Hotline. Our conversation continued. I'd like to talk a little bit about the Division III items that are at the table that you guys will discuss, vote on, not vote on, because sometimes that does happen. Things are brought to the table and then, we're not voting today. Thanks very much. We've tabled this conversation. That's happened a lot. Not going to talk about all of them. There's some that are basic rubber stamps, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean that there's things that need to be voted on to be formally approved. There are a few that are interesting, including some that you guys told me we should make sure to talk about, which I really appreciate. I want to start with one of those. Not that I want to skip football, but football always seems to have something at the convention. I say that a bit tongue in cheek. This is a bit of a change in practice playing seasons. It comes out of the health and safety and obviously concussion investigations, for lack of a better description, that have been done. I'm kind of curious. I believe, if memory serves, you all have some role in football. How does this, how big is this impact, or what is this bill going to do, and why is it maybe so important for the division? I'm not sure who to start with, so I kind of just throw that one out there for you guys.
I'll go ahead and start. We'll get this moving. So I think it's really interesting, and it'll be a really good thing because we're starting to make more movement related to health and safety. The additional time for acclimatization, I think, is a great thing. The con to that is we're spending too much time only talking about acclimatization in football, and we're not spending time talking about acclimatization in all these other sports that absolutely need it. So I am grateful, having been a proud member of CSMAS, to have been able to be part of all of these different conversations about acclimatization, but the association is more than just football, and we need to start doing something about it. I think that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to have an agreement with one thing, like what's going to happen in the fall. So, 2 days of padded practice during a regular year, that extra time for acclimatization. And right now, where we're at in healthcare and the availability of athletic trainers, and the pressure we're getting to provide medical care for our student athletes, I think folks are really going to struggle, those in our chair, saying, yeah, we really want that to happen in the springtime. Even though we're going to have student athletes. I mean, I've got student athletes that are on both sides of the camp of, man, that'd be really great, but I kind of like my spring experience right now. I don't know if I want to move to that. But yet I think we're going to feel pressure from the group to move that way if other people do. Otherwise, it'll be used against us. So that I'm really hoping someone might choose to maybe split that piece of legislation into two. Maybe the people who sponsored the legislation, and maybe it might vote differently. Jason?
I've heard that rumor today,
Yeah.
maybe perhaps that may happen. And if that happens, Dave, the only thing I would say, and I'd hand it over to the two ADs, I'm the person that tries to implement the rules and make sure that people are, kind of doing the things they're supposed to be doing on occasion. But I would say this is the division's chance, the governance chance to say, put up or shut up in the spring space, right? We've heard it. We've talked about it ad nauseum. You know what? Let's put it out there and see what happens, see if it sticks. So if this thing split into a preseason traditional spring kind of vote, I think we're going to see support preseason, probably support traditional. And there's going to be a really interesting margin there of trying to figure out what happens in the spring, because I know our football coaches want it. I'm not 100% sure all of our administrators want it. And you know what? There are really odd reasons why. Some of it's space. It's like we move out of our locker room for the spring. We give that to lacrosse. We don't have space to put the equipment. We get our equipment reconditioned. Can we get through all of that? Yes. Is it worth the pain and suffering? I don't know. And that's up for all these other three, these ADs, to make these decisions and their presidents to cast their ballots. So that's my thought on it. I think it's put up or shut up in the spring, though.
And the different reasons that you mentioned, again, permeate the different types of institutions that we have. So, and you could be looking at three different votes, right? We could split this out three ways.
Making my head hurt.
I absolutely echo that. I think if we have the ability to separate them out, and somebody, point no conference fingers, that brought this forward were to separate these, then I think we would have some different votes. And I think one of the things that me personally that I'm struggling with is, how do I provide, equitable services to all of my athletes if this type of thing takes place in the spring, right? Just the sheer support for a program of that size, it is difficult to manage in a way to where everyone else is not a second-class citizen in their championship season.
Yeah, it's a great point. And Brad, I find it interesting too, because Yodak was one of those conferences last year who did play all of their fall in the spring on top of everything. So you talk about a lot of those conversations have already kind of taken place, and it had nothing to do with practice. It had to do with obviously games and trying to find locker space and whatnot. And some were able to do it, and some, as you said, just flat out said there's no way. And so I do see that's an interesting split. And I agree, when I read through the legislation, I didn't consider that split idea. Okay, there's one for the preseason and there's another version for the spring. Quickly, Stevie, could that happen? Or is it too late to make a change to that, or can they split that and say we're going to vote on just the preseason for football, and we're going to talk about just the preseason for spring?
Well, Jason will be directing that up on the dais at that point in time, but whomever sponsors the legislation more than likely would give a heads up to the national office that they were planning on splitting that, or supporting a split of that. And then we more than likely we would know about it by the time we gather with most of our conferences on the afternoon, and then it would be out there on the floor on Saturday for us to vote. Yeah. Sounds like there's been some really interesting conversation on that. So I'm excited what we might hear next week.
Yeah, I've got a little inkling about that as well. And then, it has to be if this, then that, if this, then that. And that's usually when the chair, Steve has been in that position up on the dais, has to kind of direct traffic. And of course, I don't know when the last time something got split into three, but of course it would be my year. So
yeah, it's easy though. It's easy because here's the best part about it. You make the motion and it's non-debatable. So it becomes a vote up or down. So the membership's either going to say, hey, we like it or we don't like it. You don't have to deal with, Jason, you're not going to have a lot of moving parts up there. It's going to be, all right, we got a motion in a second. Let's, there's no debate. Let's vote and see whether you want to split. I think that's going to happen. I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think the greatest challenge will be that we're hearing from so many folks who are going to be virtual at the convention. And so we're going to miss those informal conversations of catch up with folks of, have you heard this? Have you heard that? Have you heard that? So I'm hopeful that should that be the rumor mill coming out on a Friday afternoon in our conference meetings, that folks are paying attention to that. So that way they're ready to vote on Saturday and they're not surprised.
Quickly, how would it split 3 ways? I saw the 2. What am I missing on the 3rd?
In season, moving to 2 days of padded practice. 2
Oh,
full
right.
days of contact. Yeah.
Sorry, right. I didn't consider that. So you have the preseason of football, you have the in-season adjustment, and you have the spring adjustment. Right. I forgot about all 3. Thank you. And by the way, funny comment, Brad, about football. I think the longest debates have been football items at the convention.
Could be equestrian too. Could have been equestrian.
Equestrian in 2020 was pretty brutal.
Yeah,
Angel, we've got some horses in that race. We got to keep that conversation going today.
Well played. Of course, equestrian up for debate about being a emerging sport. I come from a school that has equestrian, so I'm a little surprised it's taken this long, but I'm also not. So we aren't going to dive into that one here, but I love how you pulled that one out. Very well done. All right, so that's football. We're not, I don't know if you want to, but do you think, well, I guess it's complicated because it could get split into 3. So I don't want to ask you if it gets voted, but I guess I can't ask you anything because we don't even know if it'll get split or not, or if it's going to make Jason lose his mind. So we'll leave that one.
It's already gone.
It's gone.
Fair.
That's right.
We'll leave that one be. Another one that jumped out at me that I found very interesting, because I feel like this is almost going back in time. There's a bill up, playing and practice seasons for basically all sports. If you practice on a team currently, and even if you don't play, but if you're there for the full season and you're practicing with a team, et cetera, it counts as a year of eligibility. The idea was, if I don't remember when, but this was basically taken out. You couldn't redshirt. Now it's back as to be allowed. So you can practice as long as you don't take to the court or field or whatever and use a year of eligibility. If you practice the entire year, you don't lose a year of eligibility. I kind of understand the basis of this. There's schools who want to retain, want to hold on to student athletes or get we won't get into the nuances, but I'm a little surprised it feels like we're going back to a red shirt. I don't know who wants to start on this one, but is that an accurate way of looking at it? Am I on the right page?
I think you are. I don't know if everybody else agrees, but for those of us, all 4 of us have been in the governance structure game here for a while. And there was a time where, red shirt was Division III's favorite 4-letter word. Right? It might as well have been.
Yes.
Wait a while, everything comes back around.
That's right.
And it's usually done, with the best of intentions in the name of what is in the best intentions of the student athletes, at least at that particular time in people's views. So I don't think you're wrong I just think some of the perceptions have changed. I will say, without giving an opinion on it, that, what I've heard is that there is a school of thought that this is kind of antithetical to what, our mission is in Division III, and that's why it went away the first time. So I think that bringing it back does provide an interesting wrinkle. And then the other interesting wrinkle on top of that I'd say for Stevie and Brad is that, right now we are going through this Constitution vote. So it's an interesting time to be making such a substantive change, and maybe this might not be that exact moment, considering that there's going to be a huge vote about our Constitution and the future of Division III 24 hours earlier.
I would say very contested vote is my guess. I would not be surprised if someone on the floor does not make a motion to refer it in an effort to recognize maybe what Jason just said, which is there's a lot of change going on. And if I remember correctly, and I've been to a lot of these conventions, so they run together for me, but it's a fairly substantive convention in 2004, maybe, is when this changed. And there was a lot of this changes with playing and practice seasons, non-traditional limits at that time. like Jason said, hey, just wait, it'll come back. And there are a lot of different conversations. So, certainly from the AD's perspective, much more than me, I would not be surprised if somebody doesn't make an effort to refer it. Just simply to say, hey, let's punt and let's wait and see. Dave, you alluded to that. Sometimes you don't vote on things that are on the floor. And, I think this one's going to be close. I really do.
Also related to the quote unquote gray shirt rule that existed for a period of time too in some areas, and that D3 had somehow got rid of, and I don't remember the details now. It's been too long. So yeah, close vote. Is that the synopsis? Everybody feels the same way? I'd be interested if it gets tabled. I think you have a good point there, Jason, about the timing of it, and that sometimes comes up too. Another one. Go ahead.
Let's just be clear. That can also, and Brad's laughing because he's seen this happen a bunch of times. That can be also a self-serving tactic, right? I mean, that can be a tactic to say, well, I want to refer it because of the Constitution, but I also might want to refer it because I think it's going to fail, or I also might want to refer it because I think it's going to pass, right?
Oh,
hey,
yeah.
Listen, I was
I've
right there
that.
with the reduction in contest. Yeah,
right.
Then we got the referral on that.
That was one. That's the one I had in my head. That's interesting. You brought that one up.
I don't think it was a bad idea. I'm not going to say it still wasn't a bad idea.
I understood your premise on it, but that was the one I was thinking of. I just wasn't going to call it out. I didn't want to do that to you, but you did it to yourself.
Getting rid of the window of reconsideration seemed like a good idea too, and we'll see.
Which one was that?
That was that was the every year they would have the most. If they would have the break. And then people would go out. And if you
right.
On the prevailing side, you could try to bring it back up. And the argument.
People are leaving for their airplanes.
Right. The argument was that this was an affront to the process, but the truth was that it was an affront to their travel plans. They were trying to catch planes. So I think my claim to fame, maybe before this year, actually getting up on this. Somehow they still elected me to be on the management council, but I brought a motion to reconsider the elimination of the window of reconsideration.
You are a genius, sir.
Which then failed.
Yeah, I always thought that was the most interesting part of the convention, that you could bring back a bill for reconsideration. And the votes sometimes were closer, and there were some times where they clearly went the other direction and did not look good. So that was our conversation on some of the topics Division III presidents, athletic directors, and commissioners will be discussing or debating, and at this time, voting on at the NCAA convention this week. But it isn't all the topics. When we come back, we dive into the topic of automatic qualifiers in Division III. There is a proposal to reduce the number of teams required in a conference to gain or retain an AQ from 7 to 6. Our panel discusses that rather complicated piece of legislation and maybe how there could be a better idea out there when we come back to this special edition of Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com from the NABC studios.
Great moments are born from great opportunity. That's what you have here tonight. That's what you've earned here tonight. This is your time. Now go out there and take it.
We've got more schools than Division I, more fans than Division II, and more upsets than March Madness. There's 800 programs with over 11,000 games leading to 2 national championships. And we've been covering it all for over a decade. From Eastern to Occidental, from Puget Sound to Piedmont, from Southwestern to the University of New England, and from Hope to Calvin. Nobody covers Division III basketball like we do. We're at D3Hoops.com at www.d3hoops.com.
Football has taught me a lot throughout my life. It's definitely had a huge imprint on who I am as a person. Competing at a Division III level created that opportunity for me to go to college. Not only was I the first one in my family to graduate college, but I was really the first one to even go. Being the first one, I'm breaking that cycle, and now that I've graduated, I'm not sure what's the next step, but I know I have a lot of doors open. And a lot of those are open because I played football and ran track here at Otterbein.
Welcome back to this special edition of Hoopsville. I'm Dave McHugh, and we're talking about the upcoming NCAA convention that will be held in Indianapolis, or even virtually for some, this week. In the last segment, we discussed some of the items in the Division III legislative agenda, but one topic that could be the most interesting to watch are proposals 2022 5 and 6, reducing the automatic qualification minimum to 6 institutions. Once again, I was joined by Angel Mason, Director of Athletics at Berry College, Jason Fine, Director of Athletics from Bates College, Stevie Baker-Watson, Associate Vice President of Wellness and Director of Athletics at DePaul University, and Brad Bankston, Commissioner of the ODAC. We got together last week on the Blue Frame Technology Hoopsville Hotline. The other one I want to get to is the reduction of the minimum amount of teams, schools, whatever you want to call it, needed programs for an AQ. This one's got a couple twists to it, and I'm fascinated on your perspectives on it. And I don't know how to get all the way through it. But first off, the general point is to reduce the minimum of 7 for an automatic qualifying bid to the NCAA tournament in any sport to 6. That's for both multi-sport conferences and single sport conferences. There's a few twists on it, including forming single sport conferences and how these will be voted on. I'll get to that part later. But first off, let me start with this idea of reducing to 6. I understand. Listen, I don't, you guys can answer this question better, but it feels like that's coming from sports like baseball, maybe softball, men's volleyball, and field hockey, others that really don't have robust numbers. And geographically, it's hard to get a conference put together that's going to get you to the 7. Is that a fair representation of where this is coming from?
I would actually, I don't know if I would necessarily present it that way. I mean, okay. I think if I go back and, part of this, like you said, it's complex, like looking at the minimum number for a conference, moving to 6 as opposed to 7, right? Provides an opportunity for stability for people who are growing in that space. And I think that that's a good thing, because really what we're talking about is access to championships for our student athletes, having an opportunity, right? It's not just about me putting a banner on the wall or Angel putting a banner on the wall. It's like being able to put those kids on a bus and send them someplace to be able to have that kind of experience in all of this. I mean, I think that, Brad and Jason and I, in the last couple of years, when we've been sitting together on management council, there's been all kinds of waivers flying at us for all different kinds of reasons. And I think you get to a point where you're sort of like, okay, what's a valid reason? And can we just no longer see that waiver anymore by moving this to 6 type of thing? And can that provide some stability actually, right? Addition through subtraction in that kind of space. I think we're also individually making decisions on our campus about sports sponsorship because we're so enrollment driven in places. And that's not all of us. But there are some who are saying, you know what, like, I don't know if I should be playing baseball in the Northeast anymore, right? But when you make that decision individually as an institution, you're also affecting everybody else in your conference in that space. We've seen an issue with women's golf in my conference. And so to see that over the years, another person drops, someone makes a promise, and then they, suddenly now it's a much harder path for my golf team, my women's golf team in particular, to try and get to a championship through an AQ. So, I mean, I've got a little skin in the game on that one, but I think it's actually good from a stability standpoint. And Angel, you've got a really large sports sponsorship portfolio for you at Berry. How are you feeling about this?
Yeah, I would say that I'm in favor of it. And I'm in favor of it because I think it will allow many of our conferences to have stronger conference alignment. I think it will remove some of the affiliate memberships, because then conferences would be able to fully sponsor a sport towards an AQ on their own, which for many of our schools in Division III, financially, that could be helpful. Right, because of many of the affiliate memberships, because of having to go outside of your traditional conference quite a bit, there's a heavy price tag to that many times, and trying to fulfill that, get the number of games you need, so on and so forth, can be difficult for schools. And as we try and look, and I mean, my conference, we have a good gamut of teams that we sponsor, championships that we sponsor, and also levels of where our institutions are financially and otherwise. And it's important to consider all the schools as a part of your conference and what you're doing next. So for me, I'm in favor of it because I think it will help our conference be stronger. I think it gives us an opportunity to get closer to having a full AQ for some of our sports that, right now are just smaller. And if only one more school had to add a sport and they've been considering it, this would be what makes them turn around and do so. Instead of saying, well, okay, we'll add, but if we still don't get someone else for 6, 7 more years, we still don't have an AQ, right? So financially, is that one school willing to commit the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years with their fingers crossed that it'll happen?
I think those are good points, and I'd say there's probably a flip side to that coin too, and I don't necessarily have a strong opinion either way, but just to represent that side of it. Sitting on a committee like the subcommittee for legislative relief, where you see a lot of waivers of these type of rules as conference alignment changes, as institutions drop programs, and some of the sports that you mentioned, Dave, you see a lot of waiver requests coming through from conferences to be able to keep an AQ with 6. And I think that, some of this proposal kind of stems out of that, right? Takes away, theoretically, all of those proposals coming through. What it then might open the door to is now the request comes through for 5, right? That now we've got 6 and 6 is good, but now we only have 5 because we lost another one, and we need SLR to look at that waiver request. And now, we're looking at 5. So at some point you start to dilute the amount of teams, and then that access ratio that you might have access to for championships too. So I think there's 2 sides to it.
I think Jason really hits a lot of the key points in some of the dialogue with the commissioners recently. Part of the rationale in this is that divisions 1 and 2 they have the same number, and it's not 6 being the AQ. That's not a fair comparison. We've talked about the differences with finances earlier in this discussion, right? So their bracket sizes, the way they bracket, the manner in which they seed, the manner in which the money they have is supposed to travel, an opportunity to travel. It's not a fair comparison to say that Division 3 needs to be the same as Divisions 1 and 2 in that number. And the other thing to look at is the average size of a conference. So the question becomes, it's over 10 at the Division 3 level. So knowing that, in my mind, at least, I'm not sure where our membership's going to be, because we benefit, as Stevie said, we benefit on the skin in the game for women's golf, perhaps, to be able to preserve an AQ that we have in our league. At the same time, to me, I'd love somebody to look at it going the other direction, because it really hits on what Jason just said at the end of his statement, which was the access ratio to championships. It's a philosophical debate. Do you want more in from a conference and you're okay with them being 6 and that diluting the opportunity for at-larges, or would you rather see leagues larger getting the automatics and then having the opportunity for at-larges as a result of that? Push comes to shove, I'm not sure where the membership would be. In my mind, if you've got a larger league, you would vote this, you wouldn't be in support of this. But I don't think that's true, because I think it comes back to a sense of empathy is not the right word, but it's important to recognize that the preservation piece that Stevie talked about is at the forefront of all of this. And part of it is institutions closing and the future of higher ed in certain regions and institutions forcing leagues to make very difficult choices with membership shifts because of institutions that are closing. So I really think that's the reason for this, is this constant churn in a certain region or regions of the country related to membership, and a preservation of those leagues is the real reason why we're talking about it. Do some sports benefit? Yes. Is there a better way for us to review, perhaps, and God forbid we'd ever do this, but we've got a chance of actually looking at what the AQ number in a certain sport should be. So maybe it is 6 in field hockey. Maybe it should be 10 in men's or women's basketball, because then it creates a better balance of what is an AQ versus what isn't an AQ. And I don't know if we'll ever get there. And it all goes back to the chicken or the egg. Why is it 7? Well, it's close to the ratio. Well, I don't think that's all of the reason why it's 7. I think back then the membership may have been 8. The average number of members in a league may have been 8 then, and it's not now. So it's really difficult to kind of go back and, put the genie back in the bottle on that number. Now it's like, let's do the same thing as divisions 1 and 2. And in theory, I don't buy that as being a reason to say yes to this. Not to say, again, I think our membership will support it. I'm not sure. We're having our meeting on Friday just to clarify all of that, but I'm not sure where we'll be, but we're a bigger league. And it doesn't work to our advantage in this situation for this to pass if it were to change the AQ complexion of championships. That's just obvious. I'm just stating the obvious.
But interesting you bring up the bigger leagues, but you also brought up securing women's golf, because I also would say the bigger leagues do have some of those sports.
That's right.
That this will help. So it's kind of a weird dichotomy.
It is.
Yeah, balancing it. To your point about maybe every sport needs to have its own number, which I think is a tremendously good point. This does maybe have an unintended consequence. And I'm going to bring up that other F word that we brought up earlier. That starts with 8 letters. Football. There's only 5 at large in football. You go to 6 across the board, including football. And I could, from my own work that I've been doing for the past few months, I could foresee 2 or 3 of those gone and being AQs just in the next year or two, if not all of them. I'm not going to say I know for sure all of them. I just know there's a few that would disappear in the next year or two. Should there be an exemption for a sport like football that just cannot expand any further under the current structure? I don't know. And granted, maybe it can. Or to your point, should every sport be reviewing what is an AQ in the definition of that sport?
Well, if I remember,
go ahead, Stevie.
If I remember correctly, the access ratio, though, to set the championship itself is actually policy. So the number of teams, the football playoff isn't going to change. It's not going to move from 32 simply by moving this 8.
No, they're locked in.
Right. But there may be some leagues, to your point, that sit at 6 right now that are eligible for that pool C now. Well, now they're going to be a pool A into that space. I don't know. We've had some discussions. I don't know how many leagues are going to bust up to try and get to a space where they've got, they've had 14 members. Some of these larger leagues, they have 14 members that are playing men's soccer, and now they're going to split and go 7 and 7, so that way they can take advantage of those AQs.
Stevie, I'll put it this way. I don't think you'll see necessarily busts up, but I have, and this will for a future story. I don't want to say too much. There's going to be movement where there's at least maybe 2 or 3 AQs gobbled up.
And you know what? There probably should be, if I'm totally honest. If there is a better opportunity for somebody to go, they should
sure.
do that,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I also think too, like you sort of started in terms of, we started talking about football. Football doesn't drive the bus every time at all of our institutions about where they want to go and why they want to be in a multi-sport conference. And to Angel's point, being in a single sport conference can sometimes be pretty expensive. So it'll be interesting to see who makes the move should this be passed.
Yeah, and I would envision, conferences that have 5 schools within their conference that sponsor a sport, right? And they've had a 6 that have wanted to sponsor it, but has just decided a little bit too pricey. Or you have a conference that has 6, but they're kind of split up in different conferences. And now they're like, well, if we just come back together, we're now all under our one umbrella, right? And we have a full sponsorship within ourselves. I envision more of that than I do our larger conferences splitting in half for all the sports, right? I think this is more towards a handful of sports within a conference that really doesn't have their primary membership able to get an AQ on its own.
Brad, you had a thought earlier. Did you want to go back to that? I don't know. I'm setting you up.
Yeah,
maybe.
this is a basketball show, so nobody wants to hear us talk a lot about football.
No, it's fine. We're general here. We do everything.
Yeah, I would say to you, and this is like sacrilege. So if I say it, people will cringe. I'm not sure why football in the state that they're in can't make a case to say that they should have their access ratio. They should ask the question. And,
sure.
That's the only sport that I'm aware of, other than the ones that are capped at 64, where they haven't had an opportunity to say that. And does it increase by a week? It does. Same reason why we don't go over 64 for some of the other sports. Now you could play in midweek and have something that next weekend and some sort of a pigtail kind of environment. But I was on the football committee. I chaired the football committee. It was restraint. It was a restraint then. It's a restraint now. And if what you infer, Dave, may happen, the lid will be blown off of that conversation, because there won't be any at-larges, or if there will, there'll be one or two. And that will put a tremendous amount of strain on that football conversation in general. So, I think that there's I don't know how to fix championships. I think I could sit here. I'm just not smart enough to be able to lay it out and figure out, can you be specific? Are there caps? We had a long conversation with the commissioners this morning. I don't mind sharing this. People have a perception there's a cap on the number of AQs. There isn't. I mean,
well, the max on the tournament, right?
Right, exactly. As a division, we haven't made a philosophical or a fundamental stance as to what size a league should be. It's been come one, come all. Where in Division II, there's a buy-in that you're a certain size. And if you're coming in, you better have a membership home, because you're not just hopping into the fray here. They've moved in lockstep together to better balance their championship fields. And this is a total conversation for a different day, but in my opinion, I'm not sure we'll ever get there. Again, genie out of the bottle, right? But how do you fix it to appease what people want, which is some healthy balance, and it's in the eye of the beholder. We talked that at the beginning of the Constitution. I think it's true here too. And, we benefit, I think what Angel said was spot on. You got three or four teams in a sport now, and you got that little spark, right? Maybe men's volleyball is one that I know that a lot of conversation, certainly in the Mid-Atlantic, that's going to, if that, hey, we get a little push, we've got enough. We can have an AQ as a league. We can play, and we can make this arrangement with this other league near us to be able to schedule. And hey, that's great. So that benefits everybody. That benefits a league that's big. It benefits a league that's small. I don't know this. So the debate on this one should be pretty interesting. And, the single sport piece, is it going to encourage more of those? I mean, nobody really wants to sit for 2 years without an AQ, I don't think, but they might.
To that point, that's the other element of this. So technically it's to change that rule that single sport could also go to 6, but the next one in order of voting, and there's an order that these are put in, probably Jason's fault, that the next one coming up after that vote on AQ is what is the minimum for a single sport conference. And I know ones like men's volleyball is a good example, women's lacrosse, and some others, where it's just one conference for that one gender, for that one sport. And I want to point out the gender part of that. That would also then have its own bill to be voted on whether they can reduce from 7 to 6. And one of the questions that was asked in the information was, well, which one gets voted first? And if this isn't voted on, will this be voted on? That's an interesting thing, because one could impact the other depending on which one votes in which order, right?
What did we use? Jason, what's your term? Go ahead and use it, because you may have to use it. Mootnicity.
I like that.
What is the mootnicity? I don't know. I mean, I guess you could still, if 5 didn't pass, I'm not sure, or if 5 got defeated, why you would still vote on 6, but I guess you could. It doesn't have to be the same.
Right. I mean, it is a separate proposal, but it's certainly, hand in hand with the other one. So,
and if
you could have a motion to refer that back as well, and then you're left with, okay, what do we do with this? Well, I guess we make a motion to refer that one.
That was my next question, is if you pass it, you got to figure the next one's a slam dunk. And maybe it isn't, maybe because they say it's a single sport, who knows, that it can get complex too. If you table it or refer it, as you say, that could change the outcome of the next one. Well, wait, why would we vote on this if we don't even understand our AQ situation? And it turns into a rather interesting period of time up on the dais.
Well, yeah. And keep in mind, again, with the possible changes to the division coming out of the Constitution vote and where funds are going to be directed towards championships, that could change the whole conversation about access ratio, number of teams in there, anyway. So,
and that was going to be my follow-up. Could all of this, to joke a little bit, be a moot point if the Constitution does or does, you might come back, go, okay, we've got a new Constitution. We need to just refer all this stuff and come back to the table after we've figured out the big stuff first.
Certainly, I think that's a possibility.
That'll make business day a little bit easier for some.
I don't think you're going to see that, though.
No. I just figured I'd throw it out there. You just never know. I mean, there's other bills out there to talk about, and I don't want to get it. I've had a lot of your time. Those were the big ones I kind of wanted to hit on because those were the big impact ones. Obviously, the AQ in a sport like basketball, the change in the number of the AQ may not have a huge impact. We've got 19 to 21 at large bids, so it's not a huge deal. But flip that to a sport that conferences are struggling with to get AQs. That's a big impact. And then all the way to the other side of that, where football, as I mentioned, you've got very small margin of error. Quick question to follow up on that football one, though, and I don't know if you guys know the answer. Is it too late to add an amendment, i.e., can you go in at this point and go, like, we'd like to add an amendment, football is going to have 8, or add an amendment that we want to have each sport have a different number, or is that what the referral process is going to need to be done?
Right, that would be part of that. So the legislation is locked in its form that it is now, because there was a window that was open for that type of consideration. So you would refer it back or defeat it. And we've seen this happen before. We've seen this happen with football proposals, with graduate student participation proposals, where sometimes it's getting it out there on the floor to get it into the mix and have the debate, and it does get defeated, but then you see it come back the next year in a different form.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
That could happen.
Yeah, I've seen that a few times. Oh, again, I appreciate all the time you guys gave us to try and dive into part of this. I know it's a lot more nuanced. I wish I was coming to the convention. It's not going to happen this year. But I have enjoyed my time getting to see how it all plays out. And honestly, in my opinion, I think you need more than a few days at these conventions, because I think there's way too many moving parts. But
after these last 2 years, we definitely need more than a few days.
I had a feeling there was a counter thought to that.
That's the one advantage in all of this. When we get a chance to redo this, we can change our legislative cycle. We might not have to do this every year. That would even be better.
Wow.
So we would have a chance to chew on this for a couple of years when we have these pieces of legislation. So
interesting.
Again, that's just pie in the sky. That's just wishful.
Brad, you always have good ideas, though. I like them.
I don't know. I don't like to implement.
Some good ideas. We'll leave it at a 50-50 for you. All right. So as tradition on this show, we always give guests the final word. So I do want to kind of get your final thoughts. Either it's Constitution, D3 items specifically, the entirety of the convention, whatever it may be. I would love to get your thoughts. Angel, I'd love to start with you. Just your final thoughts, or something you want to make sure people who are tuned in understand that you want to express.
Yeah, I would just say it will definitely be an interesting convention. I think it being the first one in person in 2 years, but also it being not fully in person. We'll see if the business runs smoothly with a portion of our membership and voting delegates online. And I think after we have this constitutional vote, we'll kind of see how day 2 really plays out for us in just the Division III legislation in itself, because I really do think that if that passes, then Division III should start out the right way by taking time to consider who we want to be and how we want to do things, considering our finances as a division, as well as how we want to sponsor our sports and number of members. So we'll see. It should be an interesting couple of days.
I'll just go in order. Jason, I'll come back down to you.
Well, I agree with Angel. And, let me say, first of all, Dave, thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk about this. A lot of folks have given a lot of time over the last, even though we haven't been in person to see each other for 2 years, a lot of time to what the future of this division will look like. And I believe that all of them, no matter which side they're on, do it with the best of intentions and for the best, future for student athletes, coaches, administrators, in the division. So what I will say is that, after that day and we get into our divisional session, I hope that everybody remembers that, there are going to be people in that room that are going to be disappointed, right? It's not going to go everybody's way, because that's why there's a vote. I am confident that Division III is going to continue to kind of set the example as the shining light of not only the association, but maybe set an example for some other areas right now where our fellow, Americans have not shown a great example, right? We've splintered apart in a lot of ways when it comes down to things not going our way when it comes to a vote. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to move forward as an example of that we are still one Division III, and that we are going to figure it out and forge this path, whichever way the vote goes.
Well said, Brad.
Stevie and I have done a lot of these together over the course of the last couple of months, trying to, I guess, educate our membership as best we could, given the circumstances around the Constitution. And I played the bad cop. She always played the good cop. So I'm going to steal her thunder by saying it has been, at least the time that I've done this, and I can't believe I'm saying it. It was an enriching experience from the perspective of being able to work with our membership, the Division III membership, and see that this is an opportunity for Division III, even regardless of the vote, but even more so with a yes vote on the Constitution. It's an opportunity for the division to move forward collectively, as Jason said, and again, even in the midst of the COVID environment, as Angel referred to, how do we function at this convention? But together, I think there are bright days ahead for the division, and we got to get through this hurdle that we can, and I think we will.
Stevie, you now have to follow that.
Bad cop.
I'm not the bad cop, and I'm not the good cop.
I said I was the bad cop always. You were always the good.
We've never tag teams like that.
I know. You always were the optimistic. You were always the optimistic one. I was always the one giving the details.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to tell people what they need to remember next week. I want them to be human. I want them to be kind. I want you to stay in your room if you've got any kind of symptoms from a COVID lens. So let's go there, okay? But I think that folks need to see the forest through the trees in all of this, right? We've got a lot of things in front of us that could impact our work for the next year, for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years. I think our goal is to make sure that our division is still thriving for the next 100 years. And so while that may seem weighty and some of these decisions we're making now might be very small, they're all just steps in this path for us. So folks need to come to convention prepared to have open, honest conversations with each other, even though they might have other stress and frustrations that are, looming in the back of their minds during these moments in time. And we need to make sure that when we walk out that door that we agree we are still going to be in lockstep, because we all believe in the same thing. We want the best for our student athletes. We want to have a stellar experience. And we want the Division III model as it exists today to be able to continue until we really feel like we need to pivot and do something different. So I'm excited for those who will make the trip to Indy. I'm not taking anybody out to dinner, though. I'll say that as much. But if you want some food delivery places, I got the good ones I can share for you.
No, I am regretting not coming to Indy. I just want to get the list of the good food places that will deliver. I know the good ones already. Again, thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. Yes, we're a basketball show, but we try and cover the entire division, and this was really informative for everybody. I think even those who may realize that they're informed, I learned a lot from this myself, and I appreciate your time. Safe travels for those of you traveling out there, and we'll look forward to touching base with you guys on the other end.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks.
Once again, thank you to Angel Mason, Director of Athletics at Berry College, Jason Fine, Director of Athletics at Bates College, Stevie Baker-Watson, Associate Vice President for Wellness and Director of Athletics at DePaul University, and Brad Bankston, Commissioner of the Old Dominion Athletic Conference, who joined me last week, by the way, for that roundtable discussion on the Blue Frame Technology Hoopsville Hotline. There's a lot of legislation. We should note there are some other legislative items on the agenda for Division III during the business session that will take place on Saturday. One is changing the legislative authority and process for the D3 President's Council, basically giving the President's Council authority to sponsor and adopt emergency legislation under specific circumstances. There is also an item that will require the NCAA Eligibility Center to certify amateur status of international students. Currently, each institution is responsible for that certification. This will centrally house that entire process. Also, there'll be a fee for those students for that process. An item for D3 schools that will have D1 programs that applies more of that rules and legislation for that D1 sport under D1. In other words, more of a split. Also, establishing equestrian as an emerging sport for women and eliminating the option for a student athlete to waive a sickle cell solubility test. Also, of course, some of those bills might be split up. It'll be a busy convention for everyone, especially at Division III. When we come back, Pat Coleman from D3Sports.com joins me to discuss what we heard from our roundtable panel, and we discuss how many of these items will or won't impact Division III or specific sports. This is a special edition of Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com from the NABC studios.
For the love of the game. That's what it's all about, they say. But for those of us who are Division III student athletes, it's more than that.
It's more about team and the schools and communities we represent.
And for the many of us blessed with the strength to compete in sport at the college level, we understand that with what we were given comes a special obligation.
Our obligation to help those who have their own special needs and whose love for the game is no less intense.
That is why NCAA Division III teamed up with Special Olympics. Since August of 2011, we and others from Division III campus communities have volunteered more than 250,000 hours, time away from the classroom and practice field, reaching across the country to coach and mentor Special Olympics athletes.
And to learn that in giving, we receive so much more in return. Help us keep that dream alive.
Be part of it.
Get involved.
You can make a difference.
Welcome back to this special edition of Hoopsville. I'm Dave McHugh. Once again, I want to thank those who joined me for that roundtable discussion about the upcoming NCAA convention. The constitutional vote and the legislative items Division III is scheduled to vote on this week. It really meant a lot to me that they took their time. But what does it all mean, and how does it possibly impact the entire division or individual sports? What is the outside perspective on all of this? Now joined by Pat Coleman from D3Sports.com, D3Football.com, D3Hoops.com, D3Minnesota.com. I don't know. Pat, good to have you as always. Obviously, we'll be chatting more and more on Hoopsville in general. This is obviously our special talking about Division III as a whole. So thanks for the time, first and foremost.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I think the conversation with the panel was enlightening. I got more out of it than I expected. Certainly some forthrightness that I wasn't expecting, I think. But more importantly, a great insight that I don't think we get a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. You had a nice, pretty diverse panel in terms of geography, right? Or as diverse as we get in Division III. You had a nice range of schools, right? You got the NESCAC represented. You've got the Old Dominion Athletic Conference, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, these are people who live and breathe this stuff. I mean, you and I live and breathe this stuff from the fan perspective and from the regional advisory committee perspective and rankings and that sort of thing. You've been to these conventions, but so much of the work is done well beforehand. And just to hear that panel talk about what was done and the conversations that have been had, definitely I would consider that enlightening.
Yeah, you had the management council, which is also championships committee, and even the admin committee, all with Jason Fine. You had the constitutional committee from two members who have been heavily involved in other committees, including management council. And then you have Angel Mason, who comes from I don't want to say fringe, but kind of the quieter side of everything, who's involved, but doesn't seem to be as noticed. Those committees that have a lot of say in these things. And I thought, and we'll get to the money side of it later, but I found it very interesting that Brad and Stevie both emphasized, listen, we had our chance to talk and we were listened to. So that it kind of made me feel better to some degree that Division III wasn't just like, okay.
Right. And as far as Angel Mason is concerned, I mean, today I learned there was a Division III technology committee. That's not exactly one that is our big go-to for a lot of news that affects the sort of things that we cover. Obviously good to hear that Stevie and Brad have been on this kind of this tour, laying it out for schools, right? There are so many things going on there, lots of things. I just was happy to see too, simplifying the Constitution can only be a positive. It does seem that, like, even though, and I know we'll talk about money a little bit later, but I think the most important takeaway for me was that even though you might be, and I was fixated on the fact that the 3.18% isn't changing, but things will probably still get better for Division III budget wise. And we could talk about that later.
Yeah. Kind of a little bit of a juxtaposition there. So great insight for them. I really appreciate their time. There's lots we could dive into with these things. That's why I find not the Constitution, but the convention so fascinating. I wish it could be out there this year. But it just wasn't to be, though. I mean, maybe at the last minute. Let's start with the football side, since obviously you guys are just coming off the football season. I actually found the conversation about football practices more interesting than I realized. And I jokingly said, and they all agreed, almost every darn convention, there's some football topic that has to be decided on in Division III. Some of those conversations, when I've been in the room, have been the longest and the most drawn out. And originally, I don't think this was a topic I thought we needed to dive into. It seemed pretty straightforward to me. They revealed it's not, and it's far more complex. And I'll get to it later, but it also affects other sports possibly. But we'll get to that in a minute. Your reaction just initially on the complexity of just trying to get these practices for players.
Well, I think one of the things that one of the reasons why football keeps coming back and there's conversations about it all the time is because, and I'm coming at it from football centric guy, right?
Yeah.
But football is treated inequitably at the Division III level, right?
Fair.
We do not have regular non-traditional segment practices. We have an access ratio that is worse than the rest of the Division III sports because we're capped at 32 teams, yet we have—
You mean in the tournament, right?
In the tournament, right. We have, yet we have anywhere between 239 and 245 or whatever.
Depending on the season.
Plus or minus the NESCAC participating at any particular time. Right. The practices thing and the practices, the acclimation practices and, doing away with or gradually, eliminating the tradition of two-a-days, which was a big football thing for decades and decades and decades, which needed to happen for the health of the student athletes, has been a long conversation. And some of these things have been brought up multiple times because they haven't been solved. And I think part of it, Dave, is because, not quite half the division, a little bit more than half the division plays football.
Right.
There's, Jason Fine said 460 schools. And that means that 220 of them don't play football and probably don't give a what in a lot of cases about the needs of football. And I think in a lot of cases, those are things that don't, so they get tabled or they get voted down because half of the membership just doesn't care. It doesn't affect them. And maybe some of them are anti-football. Maybe some of them aren't. I don't know. But I think that's why we keep revisiting these things.
Yeah. And I think they realize, and I think it was hinted on, that sometimes decisions that are made for football have a trickle down to those other sports, whether you've got football or not, in a good or bad way. I'm not trying to delineate, but I found it interesting because I think it was Stevie that said it. She could, along the lines of, we're focused on these football practice things. And in reality, these need to also be true for other sports. You talk about 2 days, 2-3 days were common when I played soccer.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, what were we doing?
Right.
And I know that's had a slow trickle down to other sports to eliminate that stuff, but it started with football. So that's why football has become such a big conversation factor. There is a trickle down. I think some of those schools without football go, whoa, well, this is eventually coming for us, whether we like it or not. Maybe we can cut it off at the head. But that all said, it's interesting. I came away from that conversation thinking this is either going to get split into two things, maybe three things, or get tabled altogether. Like, this is all over the place.
And I think you certainly could deal with all of those three things individually, and maybe,
absolutely.
And maybe you do get different answers for each of them. It's certainly at some schools, having your football guys in pads in the non-traditional segment in the spring is going to be an issue, because maybe indeed that football locker room is being used by lacrosse or something else in the spring. And if you're just having a non-padded practice, it's a little bit simpler to prep for practice. If you need 100 and whatever guys in pads, you need to have those things somewhere. And I was actually really good point about having to have pads and then also helmets refurbished or, replenish those purchases. Those are things that happen in the off season. Right. So I could totally understand that.
Well, athletic training staff and fields and, right. I mean, the guys could go back to their dorms and shower if they're not worrying about pads and stuff. But you need to have trainers. You need to have a field. You need to have even more things that we're not considering there. Assistant coaches who may be involved with other sports.
Right.
There's a litany of things here.
Right. Part-time coaches who have their full-time jobs elsewhere and need to make their money in the spring. I also think too that you can't get by without athletic training staff for sure. You can get by without some of your volunteer assistant coaches in the spring for spring practices. I mean, we are already having 16 or so practices already as it is in the spring, and almost everybody is participating in some of those in some number, if not everybody, all 16. So that in and of itself is not a big change. I do think that, we just saw in the spring of 2021.
Yes, 2021.
These years are all running together.
Oh, I hear you.
We saw teams participating in spring practice. A lot of them. I mean, probably about there were probably about a quarter of Division III played a real number of games in the spring of 2021. So those kind of case studies are already out there. Case studies about student athletes well-being can be done. They're already out there. I mean, Mary Hardin Baylor won the national championship. They played a full 5 games in the spring. They played 15 games in the fall. Those kids played 20 games in the 2021 calendar year.
Yeah.
So if you want to know how that affects people, go look at that. Obviously, Mary Hardin Baylor has locker room space and they have field space, and football is a priority for those guys down in Texas. But I think that there's obviously some concerns. But Angel Mason, I mean, Barry played a full spring schedule as well. DePaul played games in the spring in football in 2021, where a lot of the North Coast Athletic Conference didn't. The ODAC played a full thing, as noted, and obviously the NESCAC did not. But I mean, all of those people on that call have basically seen on that call. I'm very corporate today.
No, I hear you.
All those people on your on this roundtable have all seen spring football happen.
Yeah, I again, if it's broken into 3, I agree with you. I could see votes going all over the place. This is not an educated thought, but I could see the preseason stuff passing, just trying to make sure that everybody, especially in hot and humid condition, are doing the best for the student athlete. The in-season one, I don't know. I could see a lot of pushback on that, trying to make sure that you don't lose what the coaches feel. I mean, when this was discussed with just the spring, and I'll get to that in a second, just the spring conversation about whether they should or shouldn't have pads and whether they should be, it's a teaching tool or not a teaching tool. There were some coaches that said, we need this, we need to teach, we need to make them better, et cetera. And there were other coaches who said, if they're not good enough by now, it's too late.
Well, and you mentioned I'm in Minnesota. That's where John Gallardi really pioneered the whole concept of not tackling in practice, not having pads in practice. And, the Ivy League has done this over the course of the past several years, too much fanfare, even though John Gallardi invented the thing. And a lot of schools are doing it. Right. And it's, my understanding, although I'm not an NFL expert, my understanding is that sort of thing is regulated at the NFL level.
It is, absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Yep. I think if you want to do something positive for the health and welfare of student athletes, that's the thing to do. You do not need to have, speaking as someone who's never coached football, I just, with that caveat, I don't know that you need to have padded practices more than those couple of times a week that this thing is talking about.
Yeah. So in season could be fascinating. And then the spring, I mean, per the last conversation, who knows where that goes? So it could be split into three. I'll be fascinated. As Brad said, that might be the most detailed and contentious, if for lack of a better word, debate among everything that they deal with. The other one that's interesting that kind of relates to football, Pat, is the AQ.
Automatic bid. Yeah.
Yeah. Listen, depending on the perspective of the sport I'm looking at this from, I've got different opinions on it. I know we were talking about this off air. Maybe we save it. I just loved what Brad said, but initially, let's just start with initially dropping from 7 to 6. If I'm in a sport like women's lacrosse, men's volleyball, or any lacrosse really, but I know there's a conference specific to women's lacrosse, men's volleyball, any of the ice hockeys, as you pointed out to me earlier. I know I'm forgetting one. Field hockey.
Field hockey. Yeah.
Baseball. Softball. If I'm looking at it from any of those perspectives, dropping to 6 makes logical sense to try and, as one of them put it, make sure the access to the tournament is a little bit more equitable, as it were, to other sports.
Yeah.
If I'm looking at this from basketball and soccer, I maybe shrug my shoulders. If I'm looking at this from football, if you're truly understanding the landscape of football, I am not a fan.
Yeah. And in Division III football, I think we have 10 conferences, or maybe it's 11, that are 7 teams. You mentioned maybe not talking about what Brad Bankston said, but I think it's absolutely.
I was going to get to it. Yeah.
Right. It dovetails exactly what you just said. You said, if you're looking at it from a perspective of one sport, you might think of it differently than if you do of the other. So let's just build that into the system.
I agree.
Let's just say football should be 8. I don't know if basketball should be 10. That was,
who knows? Yeah.
That was interesting.
That was a big number.
About, right. But
he was taking the average.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. It's true. There are a couple of really large conferences that skew that average, right? And Brad's is one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. But, but ice hockey at 6. Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yep.
6 field hockey members, 6 baseball members. I think that's absolutely a really good way to go. It's difficult in some parts of the country to field a baseball team, right? Because you can't get out on the field really and play home games until April 1st in a lot of places. Right. And then Selection Sunday is like 6 weeks later. You're trying to get 40 games in. You get 7 games in Florida. Yeah. And then you come back and you wait 3 weeks and you try to get your other 33 games in a blitzkrieg.
Absolutely.
So a lot of schools don't participate in that. Baseball is kind of a one-off sport, right? It takes a lot of real estate to play. It takes a good amount of equipment. You end up traveling a lot. Kids miss a lot of class time. Not every school is into that. So like the Empire 8 has really struggled to field a full complement for baseball. That's just one example kind of over the past.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Forever. And so there's been a lot of conference movement up there, and sure, some of it's baseball, and schools have tried to add baseball, and it hasn't necessarily taken. So I see, absolutely. I understand that. That makes perfect sense that we do that for a handful of sports. If you do this in football, you are going to have some of these conferences where their members are out playing football somewhere else, because you only have, let's say, 4 SUNYAC members or whatever sponsor football. What if the SUNYAC then decides, well, we're going to pull, Buffalo State back, and we're going to pull Cortland home, and I don't know, maybe we add SUNY Maritime because they're a SUNY school, or they're not a SUNYAC, right? And then you've taken an AQ away, and then and now we're down to 4 at-large bids instead of 5, and of course, without ever talking about the elephant in the room, the elephant as in the jumbos, as in Tufts, as in the NESCAC.
Yes.
Taking a football automatic bid, which they are entitled to do, but choose not to because they don't want to play football.
But that could get changed at the drop of the hat.
Absolutely. Right.
There are presidents at those NESCAC schools who I think are starting not to lean towards football. Are starting to realize the athletics is just great. And I know there are some who are trying to elevate their schools through their sports at the NESCAC. It doesn't mean a tide doesn't change. And also they're like, why aren't we letting football play?
Right.
And there's another bid gone.
Yeah. So what happens if, like, I don't know, what happens if 2 USA South schools go on and 2 SAA schools and 2 schools out of the ASC,
Sure.
all in the general southeastern part of the country,
Sure.
decide we're going to lift our teams out and go do something new in football. They could get an automatic bid if it's 6 teams, and the SAA and the ASC and the USA South would all still have theirs. And now we
Absolutely.
have 30 automatic bids instead of 32. This is very real. And Dave, I know you know full well that there is a conference actively trying to do this and may well succeed if it's a 6-team automatic bid.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I didn't want to say too much on, but that's what I see in front. And we haven't even talked about what I think is the other elephant that I know bugs the heck out of everybody, because the question's raised, does a conference get an extra bid? The answer was no. There's one that does, because it's a quirk. The math's there that could allow the MAC to have 2 bids if they wanted to do that.
Coming up, because a couple of schools are adding football, another school adding football.
Yeah, it's not an immediate. They could be at 12. They could be. Who knows what team could drop? I don't want to make this as an absolute. Okay, there's another bid. I mean, before we're done here, we could come up, and granted, some of it's a little bit on the extreme. You could come up with moving almost all those 5 bids.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not impossible to go to see a scenario where there's 32 automatic bids. Frankly, I mean, the Empire 8 and the Liberty League have been gaming themselves in football for several years. They've traded Buffalo State from the Empire 8 to the Liberty League. Buffalo State is not really a profile of a Liberty League school, but the Liberty League takes them. Right. The Liberty League takes them because they need that 7th team for the automatic bid. It is not at all unlikely to see those things continue to happen. And, with those, I think it's 10 conferences. If you took 10 or 11, if you take those teams out, put them in Pool B, then you've got, I think it was those 10 conferences, you'd probably have 8 Pool B bids. And that seems about right. There's still plenty of championship access for those 70 schools. Lots of opportunities. We get back a couple of at-large bids, which those Pool B teams could qualify for Pool C bids. That's not impossible. I just feel like 8 is the right size for a football automatic bid.
That makes some sense.
Conferences really want to have 10 football programs because that makes their scheduling
real easy.
Yeah. Or 8 is okay because 8's an even number.
Right.
You don't really want to have 7. It's kind of a mess.
True.
Let's legislate the 8. Football is already different anyway, right? Football is 5 weeks. Football is locked at 32 teams and can't go any higher. Football is already losing.
I mean, it would take another vote to move it to larger, but and Brad said it would take another week or some ad hoc way of doing it. But that's not a clear-cut decision. As much as presidents love football, are they going to love doing that? And football already spends $2.1 million on its tournament. You add another round.
Well, you add another round, you're going to add 4 more teams to the tournament right now. I think we're supposed to have 36 by the access ratio or so, and we only have 32. So you're adding
certainly more doable.
You're adding 4 first-round games, or you're adding 28 first-round buys if you prefer.
Play in.
No, it's not a play-in.
No, I know. I use the air quotes.
I know. So, and like the same arguments that were made in 1999 when we finally got from a 4-week tournament to a 5-week tournament is like, it's only going to be 2 teams that are playing the extra week. Similarly, it's only going to be, if we got a 6-week tournament, which I was just happy to hear Brad Bankston suggest that was not completely impossible.
Yeah, no, that was nice to hear.
And this is a guy who's been, as he said, not only the football championships chair, but on the Division III overall championships committee. So to hear him suggest that that's not completely impossible certainly has to make football fans just a little bit happier than they would be about the rest of this.
Yeah. So it all comes down to perspective. And I agree with Brad. I would love to see this tabled, referred, gone back to the drawing board and say, okay, hold on. Let's completely revisit how we access the championship. Is a blanket policy for all sports the right policy? And it probably isn't. Listen, you don't mess with the access ratio. You leave the access ratio alone. That's fine. That's where your blanket can be legit because it gives you a bedrock. But from that bedrock, build on it per sport. If it needs to be 6 for the AQ in certain sports, so be it. If it needs to be 8 in some sports, great. If it needs to be higher, I don't know the magic words there, but that's a good idea. Let's go down that road instead of this overall blanket idea.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, or fortunately in some cases, but in this case, unfortunately, Division III likes to do it this way, where it is exactly the same for everything. These are not the same sports. These are apples and Volkswagens. Let's be honest.
Great example. I'm curious because my conversations are, this is going to pass. I've actually been told by people, we're voting no, but we're very sure it's passing. I don't know of conversations like this because some of this sounds like it's already been rumbling through the division, or maybe the eyes aren't open to how this can impact individual sports. Maybe that happens convention week a little bit. And by the time they get to Saturday, because remember, there's some time with conversations with people and whatnot. Maybe by Saturday, there's finally a hold on a second. Maybe this isn't the right move. I don't know. I could be completely off my rocker. And by Saturday, this is overwhelmingly voted through. And I know on the football side, people start turning around and looking. They're going to start looking at what happens next. And maybe it, we'll see what happens. Granted, it won't happen instantaneously.
Some of it might happen
enough time to fix it later, but
some of it might happen almost instantaneously.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we'll see. You still got to get your ducks in a row sometimes, even the big moves. So we'll see how it all plays out. But I'll be fascinated if that one. I'm definitely going to be keeping a key eye on. I think they stream now the business session. If they don't, they should be. I'm hoping to make sure to carve out time to watch those morning meetings.
Well, just send someone with Twitch, and we'll get it streamed somehow, right?
And then obviously it comes down to D3 status per the Constitution and money. As I said earlier, I think I found more interesting. It wasn't the 3.18% that was the talking point. It was the 7.55% the Division II and Division III as a whole gather. And as I said earlier, why can't we round up to 7.75 or 8%? Granted, that's a larger leap. D2 doesn't lose the money, but D3 gets a little bit of extra just to make sure Division I can do what it wants to do. In the meantime, Division III is treated as the rest of the NCAA keeps putting it up on the mantelpiece as this is how the NCAA is. All right, then give us a little bit more money so our championships can be just the way the NCAA is.
Just a little bit more, right?
Just a small bit makes a huge difference.
Right. 3.18% of what I think you mentioned. I don't remember how big the pie is. I know that Division III's share of the pie, you said before we got on, is $35 million. And so I guess there's two nice things about this. One, and Stevie and Brad hit this really well, but just to react to that Division III is going to have, basically full autonomy over its business matters and does not need to go to Division I and Division II for ratification if it wants to raise its dues. That's great. Good to hear that. That some of that overhead cost.
Yeah, we get the overhead back.
Is going to get taken away, then doesn't have to come out of Division III's budget, and that clears us another 1.5 or so, maybe $1.25 million. That's almost an entire other championship, which is good because we seem to keep adding championships without getting to add more money. Those are good things to hear. And of course, I only heard the words Power Five spoken once in that entire almost hour-long roundtable, right?
Yeah.
So there's that elephant also, which could of course stomp all over a herd of them, whatever it's 64 of them or something like that, could stomp all over the other 1,000 NCAA members and really put a whole screwing to the rest of us. But otherwise, it does sound like that's a positive for Division III. It's just a small positive. It'd be nice to have bigger positives.
We're at least getting some, and something I read too. I read an article or two articles about it recently. How the next women's basketball tournament could actually be a little bit of a boon, and I'm using that term myself. That basically the NCAA has been giving it away a little bit for free, and I'm using that term loosely as well. But that the next contract, when it expires, and it's relatively soon, could actually, with women's basketball, be somewhat of a boost, and that would then turn into more money for Division III. I don't. It's not been that long ago. I remember it was a $25 million budget, so the money's obviously gone up. But as it's gone up, so have expenses, so has administration, so have sports, as you pointed out. The costs have gone up too. Looking at the recent numbers, I remember at one time, I think only one sport would be over, or one gender of one sport would be over $1 million. Now you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 maybe sports that are over $1 million easily.
Yeah. The cost of travel has just gone through the roof in the last 5 years.
The travel and the hotels and all that is a huge part of that cost. And in a sport like football, where you have to basically charter that flight due to all the equipment, that adds to a cost. But my point being, there is more money coming, and if we could getting the overhead removed, that's nice. It's too bad we couldn't get just a little bit of a roll up on that percentage point. It clearly wasn't going to happen. Everybody I've talked to said, yeah, we tried, and it wasn't a place anyone was going. Yeah. And sometimes you need to know when to quit. But I mean, so it's an interesting, but it also seemed like there was some reception, at least from above. And I'm saying that a little bit tongue in cheek from Division I, and going, yeah, you know what? We get it. Listen, don't pay for the overhead. We'll cover everything that you normally have to pay for here. We'll take that. That'll be done. That's done from the regular general budget. You don't have to be paying out of yourself. I'm sure that went for Division II. I haven't done the research on that. That's not chump change, right, as you said.
But I would take 5% more of almost anything that is a budget in my life, for sure.
And again, if Division III decides, forget it, voting against this, we're not going to do it, and it fails, nothing changes. Division I might be pissed, but nothing changes. One thing that I heard that I thought I do want to follow, that I found fascinating, Stevie Baker Watson made a reference to Division IV in the simple fact that I want to compare the votes of when we had the Division IV conversation that, this isn't right, to now changing the Constitution and everything. If it's in line, then you put up. If it's not, where are you?
That is interesting, right? And it has been, I think she said 15 years. I think it might even be longer.
Yeah, I've lost track
as to how long ago that was. I don't remember that it actually came to a vote. Was it just straw polling that we had on that?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Because if it were me, I wouldn't want to have something come to the floor and have just 25% of people support it. That's just, that's just asinine. That's not good legislating.
No,
if you're trying to make a proposal,
we've seen that before.
Well, if you're trying to make a proposal and you don't have anywhere near,
that's a fair point, though,
the votes on that, you should not subject everybody to a public vote on that. That's just embarrassing for your cause, frankly.
Yeah, no, agree.
But I think I have an idea of who Division IV might be, right? So it would be interesting to see if, there was some Division IV in that panel. So it'd be interesting to see how that goes.
Yeah, I think for some, that idea was maybe presidents who had other, lofty ideas.
Right.
And that's changed.
Being with like institutions, right?
Like institutions, or better than that, and I'm not even referencing anybody in particular, to be honest with you. I just know that we know in conversations that sometimes presidents have mindsets that don't relate to their athletic department, or don't relate to the larger cause, or don't relate to anything in particular. It's just them trying to put their name on something.
Well, and let's be honest too. I bet it's an extremely low percentage of people who cast those votes, or would have cast those votes back in 2005 or whatever it was, and the people who are going to cast votes next week. Division III presidencies generally don't stick around that long. This is a stepping stone to somewhere else, or it's someone who is, like a provost at another institution and then is going to take a president's job in their late 50s and then retire. I'd be highly, highly surprised if more than like 10% overlaps between those two voting
I
bodies.
think you're right. No, I would agree with you. And I had a conversation with several people recently, just keeping my ear to the grindstone on some things, or ear to the ground, or whatever the saying is.
Yeah, nose goes to the grindstone. Nose goes to the ground.
Yeah, that's it. Right. And if you put the grindstone just right, you can do them
Forehead goes to
simultaneously.
the desk and
Yeah,
palm
right.
goes to the face.
But their point was, listen, yeah, you knew that setup, as it were, as that. But the presidents have all changed. Now those in place in that scenario don't have that same thinking per example A or example B or example C. They've got a more nuanced or a different or whatever. And so it does evolve and it does change. And I agree. I know somebody brought up Division 4 on the chat boards at one point, and I just didn't read into any of this as a Division 4 move. Now, what I did find interesting, I think this is where people read into it, and it has nothing to do with Division 3. Part of the Constitution allows each division to create a subdivision if it so chooses. That's FBS and FCS. That's what we're discussing here, if that were to be needed at Division 1 for other things.
Well,
by the way, basketball.
But that doesn't mean, I mean, certainly could be considered. There was some talk in the 3 versus 4. It also have a 3 versus 3 AA.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to dive into that hole. I just meant that it's interesting how this has all come together. I assume this Constitution is going to change. I agree with you. The language, I've read through the Constitutions many times, because sometimes when I'm trying to find a rule, it's not in the Division 3 rule book, it's in the Constitution, and I got to go reference that. It's a very simple Constitution.
The new one.
The new one. Thank you. Yes, the new one is simple. And at first I was a little ticked off that the Board of Governors was getting kind of shrunk after we just went through a growth. But then I went, oh, right, each division is going to have a Board of Governors. Okay. And the overall one's going to kind of be even. Okay, I kind of understand this now. I'm putting the pieces together better. It's going to be a fascinating week in Indy.
Am I allowed to use the reactions? I'm just applauding that we'll have a Board of Governors that makes a little more sense for Division 3.
Yes.
Okay.
Agreed with you. Yeah.
I'm on a Zoom call like I am so many times a day.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I guess, we've pretty much covered it all. I don't know if there was anything else in particular you wanted to hit on, so I'll certainly give you the floor here.
No, I mean, I think that, the nice thing is that a lot of work has been done on this. So that's super helpful. What did we learn? Did we learn anything on the redshirting thing?
Oh, good point. Yeah, that one we should have talked about. Yeah, that one startles me a little bit. I do find the words of I think it was Jason Fine who said, listen, we see these things come back all the time. Something that got voted down years ago comes reappearing. And again, back to our conversation that you get people in new positions and thought processes. I'm a little startled. And especially the group, I don't have it in front of me, I'll try and find it here in a moment, that supported it or at least brought it to the table. I'm a little torn. I kind of understand it from hey, listen, we need to retain, we want to keep students, et cetera. But this is the antithesis of D3 to some degree. You come in, you get an education, you get the opportunity to play. We're not talking about trying to stick around for 5 or 6 years. So I'm a little surprised it's coming up, and I don't see why it would pass, but maybe I'm wrong. By the way, the group was the American East or Atlantic East Conference of the AEC, Empire 8, and Liberty.
Those don't seem like the kind of schools, especially the Liberty League, that wants to kind of not subvert, but change the philosophy of Division 3. I felt like the Liberty League is very much in that mold. That is very strange. I would have liked to hear more, and from obviously nobody on the panel is involved with one of those conferences, right? So we don't really know what the motivation is necessarily. I can understand trying to retain students. For goodness sake, every school is trying to retain students, especially in this day and age. It's a jungle out there, right? But I don't believe that going back to redshirting makes a whole lot of sense. I don't think there's going to be widespread support for it unless we're talking about a very narrow, specific case for it. I just don't see it. Like you're talking about retaining kids. One of the things that I kind of harken back to years and years ago, I worked at a school that had a large JV program for men's basketball. So they're like 15 or 16 freshmen or, freshmen and maybe a couple sophomores who were in that group. I don't know if they were being developed. They were just, guys who you could keep in the school. And it wasn't a school who needed 15 extra guys to fill beds necessarily. If there are schools maybe where that is the case, or, is there, what I'm trying to say, maybe a limited use case where, some sort of sub varsity competition gets exempted for 1 year, maybe could be talked into that if you have really good reasoning for it, and that sort of thing. I mean, we want to help our institutions survive,
Right.
but we have 460 of them. I don't know that we need to have all of them survive, if I'm being brutally honest. There's some schools I don't know how they stay open.
Yeah, I mean, if that's how you're all staying alive, then there's a bigger issue here, clearly.
Right.
Yeah, I don't love the idea that you practice the entire season.
Yeah.
You never make a game, and hey, you can come back and do that again. You didn't lose eligibility. I mean, you dedicated the same amount of time as every other student athlete on that team who played. You just didn't happen to get into a game. Why in Division III is that something that should be allowing you another opportunity?
Well, and also, if I may say, why in 2022 also, we
Yeah.
have so much extra eligibility going on out there right now,
Yeah,
right?
right now, because
of COVID, right? So everybody got a year back essentially for 2020,
Right.
21, more or less. There is so much eligibility. We don't really need to create more, in my opinion. Already super backlogged in a lot of sports and a lot of schools.
And I don't remember if it was this topic specifically, but on a couple of them, the comment was made by that group. Listen, we vote the new Constitution in. Some of these things may become moot points that we want to refer to a later date, because we need to kind of not reinvent ourselves, but we need to now put down exactly who we are. And some of these things do not need to be voted on right now. This is not the time to do that, when we're going to kind of reinvent things and twist things and rewrite things down the road. So I thought that was a very good point. Maybe half of these proposals just get, you know what? Listen, we got bigger fish to fry right now. We'll get to this while we discuss all of that.
Right.
And we'll see how that goes. I don't know.
And is it possible, like was suggested, that we might not do legislation every year? That is
that was an interesting thought.
Too. Yeah, maybe. I mean, so
I think some things you got to deal with, but I am a little worried that maybe you draw things out too far.
True.
Some things need to be changed. You don't wait 2 years to do it.
Yeah, I think like if there's a hybrid of that, it's like you deal with your non-controversial legislation every year.
Yeah.
But some of these big picture things, maybe you don't need to have talked about every year. Dave, you talked earlier about the fact that over the course of a convention, opinion may drift as people talk to each other. That would be even more so if we added an extra year to the process. But I think also this year, I wonder how much that will be, because not everybody's going to be attending in person. I hope that people who are attending in person are going to be mindful of the spread of the virus and are going to be.
Stevie made a comment about that.
Right. Not doing a whole lot of those in-person conversations. Obviously, some of those things have to happen, and in order to be an effective legislative
just do it
body,
the right way.
Right. But there will probably be less conversation, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, no, you're right.
It'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Well, and I just thought of this, and maybe I'm off here, but if you split into 3 different divisions, essentially, in the sense that you don't need all 3 divisions to be at the same place at the same time.
I see where you're going.
Maybe Division III says, listen, we have a better time when we can meet for our group. It's in June. And in 18 months after that, we'll meet again, or whatever the timing is that works for Division III. They don't need to go with D1. Excuse the alarm. We don't need to go with D1. We don't need to be there at that meeting because we have nothing to be there for.
Does that mean our time's up?
Yeah, no, it's not. But maybe I don't understand something about the Constitution that still requires everybody to be there, because there may be something that has, but I thought that's where the BOGs can come into play or whatever. But I don't know. It's just an off the wall thought.
It is one of those things, right, that is required to be a member in good standing, right? You need to have someone in attendance at the convention. Do I remember that correctly?
That's what I'm saying, is maybe the conventions aren't an entire NCAA convention anymore. Maybe it's just your individual division can meet when you need to be in good standing, but at the same time handle your business. You don't need to be at the big wig one where D1's gathering because you have no business there. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, you literally have no business at this meeting.
Yeah.
We'll take care of our business at our meeting. I don't know. Just a thought.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I can
don't
certainly
know.
understand that there's some utility to that. I think it also, though, puts Division III even more in the shadows, where they don't have any visibility at that event. So
yeah, fair point. No, absolutely. Yeah, no, like I said, off the wall just literally came to me. And that's why we bounce things around. So it's gonna be a fascinating week. And heck, by the time we get to Saturday, like I said, some of these things might not even be voted on. They may pull tail and go, listen, we want to do this a different way. And
that's how it goes.
It happens often. I've seen many a vote that I swear was going one direction, not change directions, but all of a sudden go, you know what, this isn't going to work. We got to pull up stakes. The change to how many games are played in a regular season was that.
Yeah. Again, an attempt to do something across the board for everything, because
with some nuance, but
not a lot.
No, the number was just a little off. Yeah.
I mean, again, they wanted to do it to football, and to take your 10 football games to 9 is, well,
I thought football was exempt from that. Am I wrong?
I don't remember it that way. I could be.
No, you might be right.
I could be remembering it wrong, but to do that would be not just as a 9, to be as a 10.
Yeah, but basketball and ice hockey would go from like 25 to nicely done. 25 to 21 or something. And I think that one was the one. I mean, other sports certainly scream bloody murder about theirs. But anyway, my point being, it seemed to be going in one direction. It looked like it was going to come to a vote, going to be contentious. And all of a sudden in the middle of that convention, you started to sense, this isn't going well. And they said, listen, we're going to refer it. And it was like, no, we're not going to have the votes here. This is not going to be pretty.
Dave, this is what we do, right? We try to hamper every sport in order to fix, I don't know, maybe it was baseball and softball that needed to be fixed.
I think that was,
we regionally realigned every sport in order to basically, I think, fix men's lacrosse. And
no, that's my theory.
I know. I mean, I'm buying into your theory. I'm gonna amplify that as well. And now we're gonna break a bunch of sports in order to fix field hockey and ice hockey and men's volleyball.
Yeah. The across the board ideas sometimes need to be a little bit more nuanced. Yeah. And I loved hearing that from them. I really did.
It would be, to bring this back to a basketball audience for a second.
Yeah.
It would be like if you took the same number of All-Americans from a region that has 35 teams as you do from one that has, say, 68 teams.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yep. I'm going to leave it right there.
Ass a 10.
I mean, preaching to nope. That's it. That's all I got. Gonna be good. Hey, really appreciate the chat. We should do it more often. I've heard from people we should do it more often.
You know what? Football is done. I am able to talk more often, and I am able to rearrange my office to do this more often because I don't have to do podcasts.
You should just make it permanent, sir. I mean, the idea is here for you. Take it, run.
I mean, so over here, I've got like the soundproofing stuff and that sort of thing, right? Here, I just have fancy looking background.
I like your background. I've been thinking about getting a green screen just to change up the background, but I also like ours. So it's cute.
You have a nice background for sure.
Yeah, it works. We're just if we start doing other sports though, we're going to have to rethink it. But anyway, hey, sir, thanks so much. As always, I give you the floor though, sincerely, a final word for anybody who might be tuned in.
I mean, if you're a president, if you're a university president or someone who's casting these votes, think very carefully about, what you're doing in terms of automatic qualifiers. I think that providing one across the board solution just is not something that's going to make sense for every sport, for every school. We have to buckle down and do some hard work in order to make these things tailored to individual sports. And I think Division III needs to do that. And the Division III student athletes absolutely deserve it.
Well said, sir. Thanks for the time. As always, look forward to catching up with you on a more basketball-centric topic, but enjoy the chat all the same.
You bet, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
Once again, that was Pat Coleman of D3Sports.com joining us on the Blue Frame Technology Hoopsville Hotline. I appreciate his time as well, and once again, that was Pat Coleman of D3Sports.com joining us on the Blue Frame Technology Hoopsville Hotline. I appreciate his time and all of his insight and takes on on all of that. And it's going to wrap up our special edition of Hoopsville regarding the NCAA convention. The convention is being held in Indianapolis, which is also the home of the NCAA headquarters. Those who will be in attendance are arriving as early as Tuesday, when representatives of the National Student Athletes Advisory Committees, the National SAC, will be getting together. Many more of the important meetings, including conferences, board of governors, and others, will begin on Wednesday, with the honors celebration and all of that entails taking place that night. A number of meetings will then kick off on Thursday, followed by the state of college sports that afternoon, which will immediately be followed by the association-wide business session. That is when the new Constitution will be debated on and voted on, and all that entails. The issues forum, where some of the legislation for the future gets thrown around sometimes, even straw polls on topics, will take place. That is Friday morning for all the divisions, followed by a more formal conference meetings that afternoon. And then on Saturday morning, it is the formal business session for each each division is what I'm trying to say. That's when D3 will formally debate and vote, or not vote maybe, on legislative items. We'll be keeping an eye on these things throughout the week. Even if I can't be in Indy myself, we will have updates on Thursday's edition of Hoopsville starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. And we will have the follow-up, including conversation with anything that may have taken place that was important. That will take place on Monday's live show. You can also follow us on social media for updates. We're on Twitter at D3 Hoopsville and hashtag Hoopsville. While not as active as Twitter, you can find us on Instagram with all that same information as well, D3 Hoopsville and hashtag Hoopsville. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Hoopsville, and you can always email the show, hoopsville@d3sports.com. Once again, thank you to Dr. Angel Mason, Athletics Director at Berry College, Jason Fine, Director of Athletics at Bates College, Stevie Baker Watson, Associate Vice President for Student Wellness and Director of Athletics at DePaul University, and of course, Brad Bankston, Commissioner of the Old Dominion Athletic Conference, and a big thank you to Pat Coleman, Editor-in-Chief of the D3Sports.com and the umbrella of websites underneath. Thank you for taking the time to watch or maybe listen to this episode. I certainly appreciate it. And if you were watching, maybe you noticed a slight problem with my glasses. I hope it'd be better to inform you on the historic NCAA convention that's coming up and D3's role in it and what they're considering this week. Reminder that we are covering Division III basketball on Mondays and Thursdays live starting at 7 p.m. Eastern for the rest of the season. I want to thank D3Sports.com, the National Association of Basketball Coaches, the Women's Basketball Coaches Association, and Blue Frame Technology and their Team One Sports app for web streaming for all of their support in helping put Hoopsville on the air. If you would like to advertise or be a sponsor on Hoopsville, please get in touch with us. We would love to chat with you. Thank you. Take care. Stay safe, everybody.
This copyrighted broadcast of Hoopsville is a property of DMAC Productions and David McHugh and is intended solely for the private, personal use of our audience. Any other broadcast, rebroadcast, or other use of the descriptions and accounts of this show without the express written consent of Hoopsville and DMAC Productions is strictly prohibited.